So you don't believe Donald Trump?
I don't believe Donald Trump, and I also think as an Israeli, you should pause before using the phrase terror regime, since you live in a country that just murdered thousands of children in Gaza.
But you hesitated and maybe afraid to say clearly that Donald Trump is weak.
Let me say two things. For one, of course, I'm not afraid, or I wouldn't be doing this interview or talking about this at all. And of course, Israel's not a democracy in any sense. And so my question is, why did Donald Trump allow a nation of 9 million people to pull the United States, a nation of 350 million people, into a war that will change its future and that is bad for the United States? And I can't answer that question.
What makes this opening exchange significant is that Tucker frames the issue as a question about American interests and political influence, not just about Israel or Iran themselves.
You can't answer.
I don't have an answer.
What you're implying that Donald Trump is so weak that a foreign leader can drag him into a war he doesn't want.
Well, I'm not. First of all, I never.
But you hesitated and maybe afraid to say clearly that Donald Trump is weak.
Let me say two things. For one, of course, I'm not afraid, or I wouldn't be doing this interview or talking about this at all.
But maybe you're wrong by not seeing what is very blunt truth, that if the United States would cave in to Iran terror regime that controls now also the Hormuz Passway and the terror ring that it created in the Middle East, maybe it would be even worse for any citizens in the world, not only in Israel, but also in the United States. And this is exactly what Donald Trump said. He said that the United States would have been in danger. So you don't believe Donald Trump?
I don't believe Donald Trump, and I also think as an Israeli, you should pause before using the phrase terror regime, since you live in a country that just murdered thousands of children in Gaza. We should all pull back a little bit on the rhetoric that. I'm not defending Iran, but I'm just saying
even the fact
terror
that you
regime.
Want me
it's a little hard to hear that from an Israeli right now. I have to say
that you want me to make an equation between democratic government that's acting, maybe not to your taste, but from self-defense, to a terror regime in Iran that is terrorizing its own citizens, that hanging people, gay people from cranes with Islamic extremist Sharia, to a democratic country that's abide by international law of self-defense. It's ridiculous. Do you think that Israel and Iran is on the same equation? Really?
I don't think Israel and Iran are the same.
That's what you're saying.
By many measures,
this is
they're not.
Exactly why
I can totally
this
happy
is why
to
people
tell you what I'm saying,
that,
which is
that
this.
You're targeting only Israel, and by that
well, of course, I'm not targeting anybody. I don't have a military. I'm a podcaster, so I don't target people. What I'm saying is true, which is Iran's behavior, the government of Iran's behavior is in some cases disgusting to me and immoral. But the behavior of the Israeli government in Gaza is disgusting and immoral. And of course, Israel's not a democracy in any sense. There are millions of people who live under Israeli control who cannot vote, right? And so if the West Bank, Judea and Samaria and Gaza, or whatever we're calling these places, which Israel has controlled since 1967, have people living in them who have no control over the government that controls their lives, which is true, it's not a democracy. So let's just drop the talking points. I agree with you on self-defense. I don't think killing children is self-defense. It never will be. And no amount of recounting the legitimate atrocities of October 7th will ever get me to accept this behavior from the Israeli government, from the US government, from the Iranian government, or any government. It's always wrong. And Israel doesn't like to acknowledge the existence of universal principles that apply to everyone equally. That's why they're principles, not preferences. And Israel, again, which I've always liked as a country, has a lot of civilized, decent people living there to this day, has to acknowledge that principles are universal. They apply to everyone, even you, even me. My government, your government, every government. But you won't acknowledge that. It's always like, oh, Iran's bad. Yeah, Iran's bad. But your behavior is bad too.
I want to ask you, we're still on the wars and your criticism of Israel. For example, in Gaza, have you actually labeled Israel as committing genocide? You said that.
Ethnic cleansing. Israel's trying to take the people who live there and move them out.
You said genocide. You said about Israelis,
genocide, killing,
about the people,
killing
the state of the Jews. You said we are committing genocide.
Israel has murdered all these children, thousands of children in Gaza. But the real criminal is me because I describe that as genocide. Okay, it's not genocide. It's killing innocents. It's wrong. You can call it genocide or ethnic cleansing.
So you're not
you
calling
can call
it
it a crime, a sin, an atrocity. I don't really care. What I'm saying is murdering children is wrong. You're more upset by how I describe the murder of children than you are at the murder of children, which says a lot, I think.
What Tucker is saying here is important because he points out that much of the media debate is no longer centered on what is actually happening on the ground, but rather on the terms used to describe it. In other words, the discussion sometimes shifts away from the victims themselves and turns into a battle over words and political labels.
You raise anti-Semitism. You constantly talk about Netanyahu's influence, as you said, about powerful people pulling strings behind the scenes, about Israel's grip on American institutions. I want to ask you something directly. Do you understand why millions of Jews and Israelis, and not only they, hear that language as an echo of something very old, like the protocol of the Elder of Zion, like dual loyalty and hidden Jewish power?
I am not echoing anything. I'm not implying anything. I am stating what I know to be true because I saw it and the people involved stated it out loud without shame. The Israeli prime minister pushed the U.S. president, who turned out to be far weaker than I understood, into a war that hurts the United States. That is not an attack on Jews. Israel does not represent all Jews, despite its claims. It does not. That is factually incorrect, and you know it. And so that is not an attack on an ethnic group. I am totally opposed to attacking people on the basis of their ethnicity. That's why I am disgusted by the way that Israel treats Arabs like animals or subhumans. I oppose that. That is immoral. I oppose attacks on Jews as Jews. That is disgusting. It is immoral. These are universal principles from which I have never wavered and never will because I believe them because I'm a Christian. I wish Israel the best of luck. I don't think the United States owes Israel anything. I don't think the United States should give Israel anything. I think we should stop all aid to Israel, all special deals for Israel. Tomorrow.
Mr. Kárlsson, are you running for office? Do you consider running for office?
I am not running for office. I have no plans to run for office. I'm starting to believe that the Republican Party does not serve the United States, and I certainly believe the Democratic Party does not serve the United States. And so I hope we have an option. I would like a democracy in the United States. I'd like one in Israel. Israel's not a democracy. The United States apparently is not a democracy either. Our government keeps doing things that people don't want. So that's not democracy. It's the opposite of democracy. And I want democracy very, very much.
I want democracy too. So here's at least one point that we totally agree. Mr. Kárlsson, thank you very much for this interview. Thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you for having me.